Good afternoon, everyone, and you are very welcome. Thank you for taking the time to join us today for this Lunch and Learn session. It's great to see such strong engagement from SME leaders and managers across the country, and a warm welcome to both returning attendees and those joining the series for the first time. My name is Michelle Thompson, and I'm the Manager of Strategic Partnerships in SkillNet Ireland. And on behalf of SkillNet Ireland and Enterprise Ireland, I'm delighted to welcome you to the second webinar in our AI Discovery series for SMEs. This series reflects a strong collaboration between SkillNet Ireland and Enterprise Ireland, grounded in a shared commitment to supporting Irish businesses to build capability, resilience, and competitiveness as they navigate rapid technological change. Artificial intelligence is already influencing how businesses operate, from productivity and decision making to customer engagement and innovation. But we also know that for many SMEs, AI can still feel complex, uncertain, or difficult to translate into practical next steps. That's why this series has been designed specifically for SME leaders, not to overwhelm with technical detail, but to build strong foundational understanding and highlight practical, responsible applications that can realistically work in an SME context. Last month, we began the series with Webinar 1, Demystifying AI for SME Leaders. And that session focused on clarifying what AI actually is, where it has already been used, and where it can add genuine business value. The feedback from that first webinar was extremely valuable and has directly informed today's session. From your responses, we learned that nearly 60% of attendees are currently exploring how AI could help their business, but have not yet adopted it. Others are experimenting with AI in targeted ways, such as marketing tools, analytics, or automation. And importantly, the vast majority of you expect to pilot or expand AI use within the next 6 to 12 months. However, you also told us what is clearly holding your organizations back. So many of the themes coming through your feedback, such as the practical guidance and understanding tools, were familiar to us and were the catalyst for this webinar series. And you also asked for clarity around data readiness, security, privacy, and governance, and the ethical and regulatory responsibilities that come with adopting AI, particularly in the context of the evolving EU regulation. Security, privacy, and governance ranked among the top 4 priorities, which brings us directly to today's session. So today's webinar is titled Data, Ethics and Governance for AI. And this session is about building the trust foundations for AI adoption. Before organizations can scale AI effectively, they need confidence in the quality and governance of their data, the ethical implications of AI supported decision making, and their understanding of the legal and regulatory landscape, particularly in Europe. And our aim today is to provide practical, decision relevant insights so that you can ask the right questions, understand your responsibilities, and move forward with confidence. So, let me briefly outline how the next hour will run. We're delighted to be joined by 2 excellent guest speakers, bringing both regulatory expertise and real world business experience. So in the first part of the webinar, we will hear from Professor Nessa Lynch, who will deliver a 15-20 minute presentation focused on the legal and regulatory context for AI, tailored specifically for an enterprise audience. Nessa Lynch is the Matheson Professor in Law, Innovation and Technology at the School of Law, University College Cork. Her research and expertise span emerging technologies, criminal justice, and national security systems, and she has published widely across these areas. Nessa's work informs practice, policy, and legal precedent, and she has held numerous high profile advisory roles in law reform, technology ethics, technology assurance, and judicial education. Currently, Nessa is a member of Ireland's Policing and Community Safety Authority, which provides independent oversight of the National Police and State Security Service, and she is also chair of New Zealand Police's Technology Assurance Panel. So, in today's session, Nessa will distill the key legal and regulatory issues relevant to AI adoption, including an accessible overview of the EU AI Act and what SME and enterprise leaders need to understand as regulation continues to evolve. Following that, we'll move into a practical experience-based conversation. So Alexa Toomey, Head of Scaling and AI Strategies at Enterprise Ireland, will be joined by Melissa Sheridan, Operations Director at Strata, for a 20-25 minute discussion. And together they will explore how a scaling Irish company has embedded responsible AI practices in reality, covering what's worked, what they've learned along the way, and what other SMEs should consider as they move from exploration to implementation. So please do submit your questions using the Q&A button at any point, as we'll conclude the webinar with a short joint Q&A, bringing Nessa back into the discussion with Alexa and Melissa, giving you the opportunity to connect the regulatory and the practical perspectives. So thank you again for joining us today and for your continued engagement with the series. With that, it's my pleasure to hand over to Professor Nessa Lynch.
Hi everyone. So thanks so much for attending our event today and giving up your lunchtime. So as Michelle has said, my task is to distill the key legal and regulatory issues on AI in about 15 minutes, which is quite a job. But I'm really emphasizing about 4 key takeaways for business leaders, whether you're in a large organization or a small one. So this means that I'm not going to be getting into great or technical detail, but really giving you some takeaways. If you're advanced in your AI adoption journey, it might be a useful reminder, or if you're just starting off to think about these issues, hoping that you'll go away with a checklist. And I think a key message is that this is not particularly complex. There's a lot of hype, a lot of debate. But when you break it down, the steps that you will take for responsible AI adoption are setting up structures that will be complementary to other areas of risk assurance and governance issues in your business. Next slide, please, Evan. So the first thing I want to do is just to place this in context of where we are in the regulatory cycle. So I've been thinking about law and emerging tech for about 15 years. It was a fairly niche endeavor then, but everybody is an AI expert these days, particularly on LinkedIn. And as I said, there's a lot of hype about and a lot of overcomplication about what you need to do from a regulatory perspective. In my own work, I like to think also about AI just being one of a suite of emerging technologies. And again, this is something that we see a lot in discourse. I think the idea of AI is being conflated with technology generally. So that's a key message, that AI is just one technology. And again, if you take these logical steps to set yourself up for regulation, you'll also be ready for the next emerging technology that's on the horizon. So in terms of our waves of regulation, I suppose when we adopt a technology like AI, we're thinking about how we can use it. We might be thinking about the operation and how we improve the operation of the technology. The next step tends to be the ethical considerations. Should we be using this at all? What are the perimeters about it? So I suppose about 10, 15 years ago, we saw the development of many ethical principles and charters, both at a government level, and obviously a lot of big private sector organizations were adopting AI charters. Talking about transparency, fairness, empathy, and that kind of values-based situation. But the wave that we're in now is very much this idea of legislation, regulation. So we'll talk about the EU AI Act. So we're moving to that idea of having established legislative rules, which obviously come with consequences for transgressing those laws and potential liability. So that's the stage of regulation that we are in with AI at the moment. Next slide, please, Evan. So, as I said, this regulatory situation can be very overwhelming. And I think there tends to be there's a tendency at the moment to compartmentalize AI in terms of regulation. And so from my standpoint as a lawyer, I think it's very useful to be reassured that law and regulation has dealt with so many different changes over the years. We use legal rules and principles now that were developed for when mail was delivered on horseback. We're able to apply them to technologies like email. And even debates about innovation and regulation that we're having with AI at the moment, these are not new and have gone on through previous industrial revolutions. So when we're using AI in our business, it's almost always in a particular context that is already quite well governed. So for instance, if you're using a smart contract tool to draft a contract in your business, you're obviously going to be governed and regulated by the principles of contract law. Similarly, if you're using Gen AI to generate images or texts, you might be coming against intellectual property law. And obviously, AI systems operate on data. There's already a very established data protection system. So we've got some new obligations and we need to prepare well. But it's important not to lose sight that an awful lot of what we do with AI is just another tool for some quite familiar principles. And again, that message that if you have sound government and governance and risk assurances structures, whether you're a large corporate or a sole trader, you'll already be well set up for the challenges of AI and other technologies. Next slide, please, Evan. So moving now to my four takeaways, and as I said, I hope these, if you're been thinking about these issues for a while, these will be a signal and a reminder of what you're already doing. If you're starting off on your journey, then hoping that this will be some key signals about where you need to be thinking about. And what I might say as well is that there's a lot of really good information available online, checklists and structures. So, trusting reputable information. A lot of the big Irish law firms have extensive information, and obviously there's government information as well. So there's a lot of resources out there to support you in this. So moving to the EU AI Act, which you hopefully everyone's heard about this at this stage. So this is the first real global attempt to regulate AI. As in most European legislative endeavors, it took a very long time. And a theme for today is that even though we're in the implementation stage, the sands are shifting as we get familiar with them, which is a bit of a challenge. So what we're seeing in Ireland now as well is the setting up of the specific Irish implementation system. The new AI Office of Ireland is being established, which will be the central coordinating authority in Ireland. So that will be the single point of contact, provide technical expertise, and drive AI innovation and expertise. There will also be an AI regulatory sandbox to test new technologies. So when we think about the EU AI Act, I like to say to my students that essentially it's toaster safety legislation. So essentially it's about, is this product safe to be placed on the European market and to be available to consumers? And in that way, it's conceptualized around a risk framework. So we've got unacceptable risk, which is where the EU has decided that certain technologies, such as emotion recognition or certain types of live biometric identification, that these are completely prohibited across the Union. We've got high risk then, which would be access to essential public services, medical devices, credit scoring, recruitment, and selection. Everything else then is going to be limited risk or minimal. And so obviously the compliance obligations that you would incur are very much proportionate to the risk category that you're in. But to reassure you that the majority of AI tools and systems that you would be using would fall into the lower minimal risk. So if you're in the unacceptable risk category, which came into force last year, I'm pretty sure that you already know about that. So, in terms of where we are in the staged compliance cycle, as I said, the prohibited practices came into force last year. We're supposed to have, excuse me, the high risk category come into force in August. But as you may have heard in the media, the EU is also in the process of considering a digital omnibus package, which seeks to simplify some of these rules that may not be yet fully implemented. So we're waiting really to hear when that will come into force. So it's likely to spread out the implementation phase longer into 2026 and 2027, but we don't yet know when that will happen. So in terms of the actions that everybody should be looking at, Stock take and mapping what AI tools or systems you're using in your business, including third-party tools. You want to be classifying those by the risk level. As I mentioned, there's extensive information available online from the EU itself, from regulatory bodies, and many law firms and regulators are also issuing guidance. Assessing your status. Are you a provider? Are you developing tools and putting them on the market? Or are you a deployer? Are you using something in a professional context? Proportionate then to your risk levels, you'll be looking at the governance structures that you need to have in your organization. Do you need, for a very large corporate, to be setting up something specific? Or for most businesses, you'll be folding this into your general board structure or risk assurance structure. Education and training is a very important one. So the EU AI Act has a literacy requirement. So this idea, if you're using AI in your business or your undertaking, that you're ensuring that your staff have sufficient AI literacy to use those tools and systems correctly, including the social and ethical implications. So the training and education is a really, really important part of this. Next slide, please, Evan. So something, as somebody who has worked a lot with different forms of emerging technology and someone who holds a couple of assurance roles, something that I always talk to people about is about the people factor. And so, akin to cybersecurity, you can have the best systems and processes and documentation in place. But if Moira or Sean in your office is going to click on the phishing link or carry out some other action, that is obviously a major risk. And I think that we need to apply the same sort of frame of thinking to AI. That training is a vital lever in risk assurance and safe adoption. So again, from my standpoint in the law and legal education, we're seeing liability for AI generated errors in legal documents being really prominent in the media and, coming to the point of professional negligence in some places. And a lot of the debate tends to be about the choice of AI tool or system that someone was using, the error rate. But I think when you drill into a lot of these cases, like what you're seeing is lack of appropriate training, lack of appropriate supervision, junior staff being left overworked, maybe not with the right tools to carry out their work, and essentially taking shortcuts. So again, you can buy or develop the best tool or system. You can have all those procedures in place, but your people and your training and your supervision are still a really important part of your risk assurance. And again, I see this all the time with my students. It's the students that are under pressure and that are feeling unsupported that might be tempted to use AI in a way that's not allowed or is inappropriate. Next slide, please. So, as I said, working again across my career in areas of acute risk for AI and emerging tech, there's huge importance in your business of ensuring that you retain the trust and confidence of your consumers and of your clients and your customers. And because, as we know, trust and confidence takes a long time to build up, and it can be lost very, very quickly. So we do have these legislative rules gradually being implemented, but we're still going to have a broad space in our businesses where something might be lawful, but it might be unethical. And I think, based on my experience of coming in to a lot of situations where the adoption of emerging tech and AI has gone wrong, I think a fantastic protection at all areas of your business is diversity. So what I mean by this is diversity in design, diversity in operation, and particularly at the governance and risk assurance level, because I suppose I work a lot with law enforcement, and if everybody in the room is wearing a blue or white uniform, there's often quite I suppose a coherence of thinking. Whereas if you get people from different disciplines together and in your board structures and in your assurance structures, where people are asking those questions from different perspectives and different disciplines, I think that's a key protection. So that's diversity of generation, diversity of gender. There are many forms of diversity, but I think that ability to ask questions from different perspectives, either at the development and design stage, the deployment, or in your governance and risk assurance processes, is a really key protection and antidote for risk. Next slide, please, Evan. And so, just moving to wrap up, I suppose the world we're in at the moment is tremendously uncertain for a large variety of reasons, but there's so much discourse at the moment about geopolitics. Obviously, in Ireland, we are in a particular situation between America and between the EU, and obviously a lot of tensions and a lot of responsibilities there. But I think you can get overwhelmed with a lot of these geopolitical situations. And as I said, there's a lot of discourse and a lot of debate around what way the EU is going to go. Will it rein in some of the rules? Will it hold fast? But to use a running analogy, you've got to run the mile that you're in your particular situation, and don't get too caught up with what might happen next week. Concentrate on the basics, on your tech list, what you need to do. And a key message is that, again, on that theme of AI is just another form of technology. It's another form of potential risk. So those structures that you already have, particularly if you're in a smaller enterprise, are going to be relevant to several spheres: cybersecurity, data protection, insider threats, all the risks that you can imagine. And so you don't generally need to stand up something completely specialized for the vast majority of enterprises. And as I said, in this world at the moment, there's a huge debate between innovation and regulation. What are the settings that best promote innovation? But I think we can be certain that when you use AI in a trustworthy and safe way, this is a competitive advantage, particularly in gaining and keeping the trust of your customers and clients. So I'm going to finish up, and there will be some opportunity for Q&A later, but I'll hand you now to Alexa Toomey, who's going to take you through the next session.
Thanks, Nessa. So look, I mean, I think we've just heard about the EU AI Act, and we've got a lot of information there in terms of how we can all best kind of go forward with the principles of the Act, as well as making sure that we're in compliance. But I think the big takeaway for me is that this isn't just about compliance, it's actually about the trust and ethics and actually doing the right thing, as we all embrace AI in our daily jobs. So from an AI perspective, this topic that we're looking at today is one that's coming up a lot in the conversations that we're having with our clients. I guess companies are eager to embrace AI and to bring it into their business, but everybody wants to make sure that they're doing it in the right way and that they are doing the right thing, as well as making sure they're in compliance with all the laws and regulations that are emerging. So I guess the big question now is about how do we move forward confidently with AI, knowing all that we know. And I'm delighted to be joined by Melissa Sheridan, who's an operations director in Strata, who's going to talk to us a little bit about a live example of how a scaling Irish company has embedded AI into their business in a very responsible and ethical way. So Melissa is, as I said, operations director in Strata and has been responsible for embedding AI into their business. Strata is a company involved in kind of construction planning and kind of digital construction. And I guess that's a very highly regulated sector. So it's one where they're very conscious of making sure that they're in complete compliance with all of the rules and regulations. But I think more than that, Melissa is going to be able to talk to us about, from a people perspective, they've brought AI into their business and brought people along with them while doing it in that ethical way. So Melissa is an advocate for responsible and trustworthy AI and is very used to speaking to groups such as ourselves. So Melissa, I'm delighted to have you here today. And we're going to just try and have a bit of a conversation now around how you have embedded AI in your business. So you might start by talking to us, giving us a little bit of background on Strata and talking to us about how you've gone about bringing AI into your company in a very kind of structured way.
Sure. So look at thanks very much, Alexa. So by way of an introduction, so Strata is an Irish-owned engineering company. So we're headquartered in Dublin, and we really support large-scale construction and engineering projects. So these are generally infrastructure projects, so rail, water, airports, and then also we work in the data center sector, healthcare, energy. So as Alexa referred to there, they're generally high risk, huge projects, complex projects where safety is also paramount as well. And our core services that we deliver to those sectors would include schedule management, so managing the time element of those projects, 4D visualization, so we create animations and visualizations about what projects are going to look like prior to construction. BIM, data analytics is big for us, and delay analysis, but that's really the space that we operate in. And our clients would include the asset owners as well as large contractors and specialist project management companies as well. And we have a team of about 70 people now in total, a multidisciplinary team. We have a lot of engineers, construction professionals, and then IT specialists. And really, we work collectively to help those clients build more efficiently and more effectively. And really, if I think about like how we use AI in the business today, and we've certainly been on a journey, and we'll cover more about that as well. But today we really use it in two main ways. The first being that we use it to help us be more efficient from an operations perspective. So practical examples there would be that we've developed our own agents to help with, for example, HR, policies, forms, queries. It's the first port of call for employees. We also use it for kind of diary management, marketing, general kind of elements of that as well. So that would really help us just become more efficient. And then the second part really then is to enhance our services. So if we think about some of the projects we're involved in, and I take an example of a data center where there could be up to 15,000 different activities happening in site, there's a huge amount of data that you can learn from existing projects to feed the planning for future projects. So it's really about analysing that data, interrogating that data to inform future projects in a really, I suppose, from a very informed position. And while it sounds probably more straightforward, the challenge is that there's a lot of variability in that data. So we certainly work through it and continue to work through it.
I have no doubt there's nothing straightforward about managing that amount of different moving parts. But you just might kind of take us back, Melissa, to kind of when you first started using or started kind of realizing the value that AI could bring to your business, and how you moved from where I think a lot of companies are at the moment of kind of using it in a small ad hoc way to kind of bringing that structure around it. Because I'm really conscious that Strata is in a very high growth mode at the moment. So you're bringing this new technology and new processes and skills into the business while you're in a really high growth phase as well.
Yeah, look at it, and Alexa, that is a big challenge. Like, so when you're scaling, you're learning about new technology. The technology is also moving at the same time. So you're constantly trying to get that balance right about focusing on the day to day and serving the clients that you have and making sure that you've good repeat in that perspective as well. I think a big kind of driver for us was, look, if I go back a couple of years as well, we engaged with Cedar early on. And one of the things we did with Cedar, and probably to explain who Cedar is, so it's Ireland's national institution for the deployment of AI across all different industries. And they're based out of UCD and very supportive of all SMEs. But we engaged with them, and one of the things we did with them then was we could see the opportunity, and I gave that example, let's say with the project where we look at the data from construction projects. We could see the opportunity, but weren't really kind of 100% sure how it would come together, and we certainly found them very helpful in that. But another element that we did with Cedar was we applied and were successful then for a work-ready graduate placement with them, which is someone that we had for the whole of 2025. So that's an AI engineer that is very connected to Cedar, but gets placed in your company for the vast majority of the time. Now, they do go back and forth for various lectures and topics. But in our case, Shubham is the guy's name. He is really strong and good. And he sat with our engineering team and kind of worked with them to really look at those practical examples of how we could drive it forward. And I think that's probably something that I would say is really important. And Nessa referred to it earlier as well, is like there's a lot of hype from regulation. There's also a lot of hype in terms of implementing this, and there's lots of tools available. But I think you always have to bring it back to like what's the business case that you're trying to solve. And I think you also have to always look at it is, you know, is there a process there? Because if there isn't an existing process that it can kind of build on, it kind of becomes quite erratic. So you have to be really clear on what you're trying to achieve. Try not to do everything at once, because certainly you feel that there's pressure to do everything at once, but really focus on what's going to deliver the most value for the business. And I also think that involves a certain amount of prioritization, because you could have a really big idea hopper with lots of ideas, but you have to start and focus on the ones that's going to deliver the most return for you. So it was the combination of those things. And if I reflect back on the placement, we've since offered that individual a full-time role with us. So he's continued to work with us because of the value that he's bringing.
Yeah. And I guess kind of something that I know that you've managed quite well in Strata, and that I think for companies who are at the start, is that piece around what does a proportionate governance system look like? So you've kind of made the decision, or you've seen the clear value, and you're introducing AI tools into various different parts of your business. How did you kind of go about that, kind of saying, right, well, we need to manage this in a very careful way, while not kind of going so far that you're hamstringing yourself? I know you adopted one of the ISOs, but you might, again, just how did you thread that needle?
Yeah, so look, the reality is, look, you're a small company, you're growing, and generally then, if I take it just from a market perspective, the types of clients that you're dealing with become bigger as well, and they've more mature systems, and they're looking for certain criteria from you as well. So we did implement a number of ISO standards, and we've certainly been on a journey with that. We've collected quite a basket of them at this point. But for me, like, they help put a framework, a best-in-class international framework for how you approach things. And I think a lot of the time when you're doing things well, it comes together quite nicely. But if I look at it from an IT perspective, we have ISO 27001 that we implemented now just over a year ago, and that was hugely important for us as well. And then, you know, from that, the other one that we're looking at now at the moment is that there is one around AI management. And it very much speaks to all of the points that were covered in the earlier session, where it's about just making sure that you have strong governance in place, that you're providing the training to the right people, that you have the right parameters in place. So I think it helps you give a framework. And the other part that I would say that it helps you with is it helps you with those kind of bigger clients that have higher demands. And it also helps you from a tender perspective, which is really important.
I was going to ask, so would your clients, they respond well to seeing that you have that really strong governance culture in place, and that you have the ISOs there to kind of back it up?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, Alexa, and like probably one example I would say as well, and if we look at it from a cybersecurity perspective, so cybersecurity is a big topic for a lot of companies now. And last year we made the decision to look at cybersecurity as an organization, and we have a really strong IT leader in-house, which is great, and we had good guardrails in place. But we did avail of the EI Cybersecurity Review grant, which is available at the time, which I think is a great asset to Irish companies to have available. And really what that gave you was, it was an independent review of what parameters and what guardrails and what policies you had in place and what systems you had in place. But I suppose the bigger piece of that was it gave you then the recommendations for what you needed to do to improve. And that gave you then a gateway into a larger opportunity with the National Cybersecurity Centre to avail of a larger grant with them that enabled us to put those improvements in place. And look, as a result of that then, and we embarked on that for the last quarter of last year, we have a cybersecurity review now of 9.1 out of 10, which we're very proud of and is very good. If I look at it then from a client perspective, they're looking to see what cybersecurity metrics you have. So we have Cyber Essentials as an independent accreditation, and we have that score and that review as well. And most recently, like what I've started to see a little bit is some clients looking to see what's our cybersecurity insurance policy, which again is another step forward and new. But by having all of that groundwork done, we're able to engage them with an insurer in a very proactive way and provide that information as well. So it certainly gives you reassurance, it gives your clients reassurance, because they're nervous about their data, they're conscious, and these are generally, you know, complex, sensitive projects that we're involved in, and it gives you that independent accreditation to confirm that you're in a good place.
It really is a new world that we're all operating in, you know, cybersecurity insurance on top of all the other insurances that SMEs are managing. But I guess just kind of in a really kind of on a day-to-day kind of basis, as you were you kind of looking at cybersecurity and kind of looking at the wider structures that you put in place. What did that mean for kind of somebody coming into work in Strata in the morning? How did you make that very real for your colleagues? Because I guess kind of we're all used to kind of doing, well, maybe this is an enterprise or anything, we all do a lot of mandatory training on different things as they come out, but I think that there's a difference between that kind of structured training and then making it part of your lived day-to-day experience. Have you any tips for people online today?
Yeah, so I actually think, Alexa, there's probably two parts to that. So there's number one, like if you look at the requirements, and Nessa would have covered it in terms of like you have to have AI literacy. So like we're living in an era of new tools. And you mentioned earlier, also living in an area where a business is growing, so you're trying to get that balance right. But you have to provide training to people on how to use those tools. And I think you'll find some people will embrace them far, far greater and far faster than others as well. But ultimately, the train has left the station, and we all need to embrace this as well. And I think that's where it's important to bring it back to, like, what's the use case and how much time is being saved and how is this going to help us be more effective as well. So you've got the practical steps like the training, you've got the other components about an AI acceptable use policy, so having that in place. You also have to have criteria with regards to what tools you're going to use, how you're going to use them, and it was covered from that act that you're going to have a list of the tools in-house that you're using as well. So I think that's one piece, but I think the other piece then, which is the bigger piece, because I actually think the technology in many ways is the easier element to adopt, but it's the whole area around change management. So this is a new way of working. And I think that's where senior leaders really have to step up and embrace it and walk the walk. And look, it's not easy because you're balancing a large work volume, but it is about trying to be clear and get those small wins and amplify those. So it's not about trying to do everything all at once, because it's just not going to work, but to focus on those use cases. And like if I look at us as an organization, and we have Microsoft Copilot Premium for a core group and another group then on enterprise licenses. But for that core group, there's a big investment from the organization in terms of licensing costs. So we manage that and monitor that on a monthly basis. We look at the high users, we look at the middle users, and particularly from high user perspective, then we look to share those case studies that are making a difference to really drive a higher implementation across the board as well. So you have to have a growth mindset. You have to be, positive about this. You have to have the good, strong governance in the background as well, but you have to be moving forward. And even if that's in small steps, it's certainly the way forward.
And kind of maybe moving slightly onto the whole, because I know you're dealing with huge volumes of data in your business. I mean, and anybody who's using AI is going to be, maybe not quite as much as what comes across, comes through Strata's business, but how did you, because I think having that really strong data management fundamental is essential to being able to use AI in a way that is going to add to your business and is going to generate value. And at the end of the day, you're a co-owner of Strata, and value is, you have to be looking at that bottom line as well as looking at being kind of using best in class tools. How did you kind of go about that data management piece? And the other piece that's coming up a lot in conversations that we're having is, as you're using and managing more data, there's obviously an IP question that can arise when you're working with customers.
Yeah, the IP piece is huge. Look, you've got a couple of things when it comes to data. You have the quantity of data, and that's increasing all the time. You've got the quality of data, and certainly in the space that we're in, if we look at it from a project perspective, there's a huge amount of variability in that data. So you spend a lot of time interrogating it at the beginning before you actually get to doing any of the activities with it, and it's constantly evolving. So there's no quick or short answer to that. That's a work in progress. But the whole space around IP is a big one. And if I look at the steps that we've taken, because we look at what intellectual property we have in-house, the same as lots of other organisations, and it is a new era in terms of you're looking at what information employees have access to. So we've introduced like a new intellectual property like there's an acceptance criteria for employees to really understand where we stand with that. We've also had to look at it from a supplier or vendor situation as well, making sure that we're clear on that and bringing AI into those documents. And the same even from a client's terms and conditions document as well. So we've worked with various lawyers to make sure that that's all upfront and clear and fully compliant with the laws that are there. But that's certainly something that's changed a lot very recently.
And I guess kind of, again, I suppose just bringing it back to the people piece, because I think people are at the center of, we think of AI, or maybe those of us who are less technically minded, my first thought, certainly when I started learning more about AI, is around the technology and the solution. But as you've already said, that can sometimes be the easier part, and the people piece can be the harder part. So kind of when you're talking to people who in your company, I guess you've a lot of engineers, you were saying you've kind of a lot of technical people as well as that. And you're talking about things like IP management, and you're talking about strong data management principles and the kind of regulatory and legal requirements around managing AI. How do you find, or do you have any tips that you can share with participants here today? How do you best bring people along? You've mentioned it's around kind of showing them the value that it can add, but I guess in terms of their day-to-day job, you'll have some who are just dying to get with the program and use the technology, but you almost need to kind of say, yes, we'll get to that, but here's all the things that you need to consider first. Or kind of talking to people about IP management who've maybe never considered IP before.
Yeah, look, it's a good question. I think you have to bring it back to the why. Like, why are we doing this? Look, and like we're lucky in that we have a strong and very high engaged team as well. And for me, it's really bringing it back to look, it's about protecting the organization and making sure that we have these parameters in place. And I think there's also a clear understanding of people that we are operating in a new world. And if I look from a people perspective, I mentioned it earlier, you have some people who really want to adopt this and really want to move forward at speed with it as well. And you want to keep that enthusiasm because you want that growth, you want that and passion for what they're doing. But we have to just continue to do it in a very measured way as well and to share it with others. So I think that's important. But going back to the piece around IP, it's kind of explaining in regular terms, like, why are we doing this? What is it? And it's about ultimately making sure that we're stronger as a result of it because we are investing in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think kind of from what I've seen, I think in general, when it comes back to that, this is how it's going to make your specific job maybe a little bit easier. Or I heard a great phrase, it's actually about doing even more with more, so it's not the more with less piece. And I think for where you're at in your growth journey, it's certainly not that, but it's about how can you do even more with the people that you have. But equally, I think it's around that piece that you said, I really like it, session in terms of how are you protecting the business, how are you helping the business to grow and making sure that there's a good kind of future kind of pathway for the company.
But I think, Alexa, just one point I'd say on that as well is, like, if I look at the space that we're in as well, and engineering and construction in general, like, there is a shortage of really good people, and I think that's clear as well. So we would frequently communicate that we want to use these tools to make our time as efficient as possible. So we want our engineers to be focused on more high value activities and then to remove the lower, more repetitive tasks from them as well. And I think good engineers, and we have lots of them, that's a real focus for them as well. Like, they want to be in the space where they're delivering value as well. So I think there's an appetite on everybody's side, but it's about bringing them with, working with them and bringing them with you on a training journey to understand that, and then making sure that the right security parameters are in place. Yeah. And a Rome wasn't built in a day; it's step by step. So absolutely. Even though you want to go really fast, you have to sometimes slow down.
And just, I know you've kind of touched on it a little bit, and I don't want to put you in an awkward spot here, but you have used some Enterprise Ireland supports, and we've been delighted to be able to support you as you've rolled this out. And I know you've engaged with CEDR and the National Cybersecurity Centre. I mean, look, we hear the feedback. We're trying to always make it easier for client companies to engage with us. And I know our colleagues across other organizations are doing the same. But do you have any reflections you'd like to share in terms of how you were able to access the supports and engage with those supports?
Sure. So look, Alexa, like, I think in every which way, like, we're very fortunate in Ireland because there is a lot of support available to companies. But I think you have to lean into that support. And look, I'm certainly very grateful for the client advisor that we have. We have a very good relationship with her, and it's very much two ways that I'd ring her up and just talk about some of the challenges that we have, and oftentimes she'll explain different options that are there as well. So I think these are available, but you have to lean into them. Look, there's paperwork involved in them, there's follow up, and it's all very above board. But once you go through it, like, I think it helps create a stronger organization for you. And I think when I remember going to the cybersecurity review at the beginning, listening to the webinar or at some point around that, and I think you mentioned that only maybe 400 out of 4,000 clients had availed of it, which I couldn't really believe, because it's there for companies to do it. And in that case, you're really just contracting a vendor to deliver it, and it's done and you have it and you're on the first step. I think that's important. I also think sometimes when you're engaging in some of them, you have an idea of what's going to happen at the end of it, but oftentimes it leads to another thing and it kind of grows from that. And then you look back and you're very grateful for that journey that you've been on. So certainly if I take the cybersecurity review, like we embarked in that, and it led then to the larger one with the national cybersecurity, then getting this good score, and then cyber essentials, and then helping us with the insurance documents that I shared as well. So it kind of works like that. And I think the same from an IP perspective. I remember, we had availed support around IP, having good conversations with the IP team within EI about that. We progressed with that, and then from different discussions then with lawyers after that, it led to other elements of that, such as let's say that agreement for employees or revised terms and conditions that maybe you didn't fully understand when you were engaging with it. So I think you learn from all of those interactions, but I would certainly lean into the conversations, ask the questions, and move forward, really. So it's all progress. And whilst it mightn't seem urgent today, you look back in 12 months' time and be really grateful that you're taking those steps, because the world is changing.
Yeah, and I think the pace of change is just remarkable.
Yeah.
So look, Melissa, thank you so much for your time. But my last question before I let you take a breather, there's a lot. We've had a great turnout today. We have, I think, nearly 200 people online with us today. If you were talking to yourself 2 years ago, or kind of somebody who's saying, God, there's definitely something in this, but I don't know where to start. What would the kind of top 2-3 priorities be that you'd say, look, these are the things you need to get going with, and the rest you can kind of come to next?
Look, I suppose the first one is always going to be education and learning and understanding as well. So I would lean into some of that education, and there's lots of it available, such as the webinar series here today as well. I would also say talking to other companies at the same stage, learning what they're doing, because you're always learning from others in terms of how things are being implemented. And I do think then in the background, the whole piece around governance, so whether that's starting with cyber security or just your IT management in general, it's increasing importance, and you have to kind of run that in the background as well. So I think they would be the steps I would do. And look, the reality is as well, even if you look at whether it's ChatGPT or any of them, you put in your kind of job function and you can put in the day-to-day examples of what you do. It'll give you back many ways that AI tools can help you as well. And then I think the piece that's important is continuous learning after that as well. So whether that's going to one webinar on Copilot every couple of weeks, or just exploring different things, but continuing to keep that top of mind, because it's just moving on all the time.
Yeah. And kind of lastly, you're in the very, I'm going to say the very fortunate position. I'm sure sometimes it's a lot of stress as well. You are a leader in your business, and you're a co-owner of your business. So you had the buy-in from yourself to begin with. But if somebody on your team was coming to you trying to sell the idea of using AI in the business, what would be the things, I think, kind of that commercial return, that where it can bring value to the business? Is there anything as well in addition to that you'd really want to hear, or that you'd recommend people consider if they're looking at wide scale adoption of AI in their business?
Well, I suppose, look, the reality is you have to look at wide scale adoption. So you have to have an overall plan. And whilst you might start small and start with certain elements of it and kind of build your confidence on that as well, ultimately it comes back to what's the business case for doing this? And that involves what's the return going to be? So whether that's time saved and you could put monetary values to that, or whether that's, even from an investment perspective. So to give you practical examples, look at, I might speak to Shubham and ask him about developing a particular agent. The feedback could come back that it might take a lot of hours to do it. So you have to balance then the return on that as to whether that's actually worth doing that, and what you're going to get out of the end of it as well. So I think it's really back to what's the business case? So what's the return going to be, and what's it going to take to actually develop that? Or is there a commercially available tool that could help circumnavigate it as well? So I think that's important, but I do think it's important to encourage that enthusiasm and encourage that growth mindset. It's very important.
But Melissa, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really, really great to hear that use case, and I think building on what we heard from Nessa in the first part of this afternoon session, looking at for a company who is in a high growth mode, how you've really responsibly kind of adopted AI in your business in a way that's working for you, working for your team, and also most importantly working for your customers as well. So thank you so much. I think we're going to move across into a Q&A session now.
Yes.
So I'll stop asking the questions for a little while and I'll hand back to Michelle.
Thanks, Alexa, and thanks, Melissa. That was yeah, a great chat, bringing everything to life. We've got some great questions through on the Q&A as well. I'll try and synthesize those and kind of group them together. But maybe I'll give you both a little respite for a second, and I'll bring Nessa back in. And I liked your second last, almost last question, Alexa. You were squeezing Melissa for everything there, but it was a great question around the one or two things that you'd prioritize first. So Nessa, from your perspective, for those SME leaders that are listening today who are maybe very early on their AI journey, what are the one or two things that you think that they should prioritize first, just to ensure that they're setting themselves up for that kind of responsible and compliant AI use?
I think so. Building on a point that Melissa made about the education and training, but an absolute basic, particularly if you're not somebody who's got a particularly technical business, but you're looking to adopt AI, is actually that basic understanding of what AI is and how it works. And even that idea of, what is ChatGPT and those LLMs and, what are the limits? So some of that really simple doesn't have to be that complicated, because I think when you start to learn how it works, and particularly that it's not a search engine, it's more predictive, that naturally leads you to some of the questions around actually how accurate is this, or where should I be using it in my business? So that's a simple example, but I think getting a basic understanding about how some of these tools and systems that you're going to implement work is a natural conversation starter. But obviously the education and training piece is really important, and that is very much proportionate, obviously, to your scale and your usage. But as we've emphasized this afternoon, the AI literacy aspect is a compliance and a legal requirement. So I think everybody who is using AI has to be cognizant of that. And again, that's going to be very much proportionate to the complexity of what you're using. But I think that would be the thing I would be starting with. And obviously there are questions around, we've all been subject in large organizations to these, you have to do your 10-minute compliance training that you do while you're watching three other things in your screens. So I think linking it back to that effectiveness piece about having it as part of your induction and development training, rather than that very tick box approach, would be my recommendation.
Yeah, thanks, Nessa. And without even trying, you've kind of referenced what we did cover in webinar one, that demystifying. So hopefully that recording will be available soon to share with participants, to kind of, yes, large language models and just what is this all about? And I think Mark Kelly had a great point of, maybe we should all stop doom scrolling for 5 minutes and have a little play on an AI tool, just to even have a better fundamental understanding ourselves, even in our personal lives, before we bring it into our work life. I'll swing maybe to and actually, sorry, I think one of the questions that came through was wondering if let me see, is there any specific checklist you would recommend, Nessa, for businesses and SMEs to use in terms of making sure their businesses are AI Act compliant?
Yeah, so the EU actually has some really good starter information on the website. And obviously, as Ireland's AI office begins to stand up and develop, I'm sure they will have that as well. I'd be reluctant to name any law firm, but I find, even for myself, checking stuff, that most of the big law firms have got really good current information, because I think something that we've all mentioned is there's so much hype, there's so many people trying to sell you things. I think going to the kind of government and EU sources or a reputable in-date source is the best. Whereas, I think if you have a look on Google or a search engine, there'll be a lot of perhaps out of date
Sponsored
information.
ads or
So,
whatever else. Yeah.
yeah, I would go to the source of the EU and the government websites first as a first port of call.
Perfect. Thanks, Nessa. Maybe bringing you back in there, Melissa, just in terms of that kind of competitive advantage angle that you were talking about there. And there was a question about kind of wondering what tools Strata's using as agents, but maybe if you don't want to give that away again, maybe more, how does the team decide on choosing the tools in terms of purchasing and budgeting?
Yes, it's a mixture of two. So, like, we develop a lot of our own agents now at this point as well. Is probably one point that I would say, because we've that capability in house as well. But from a tool perspective, like, we have a process in place. So where we would evaluate the tools, and there'd be a couple of lines of sign off on it as well to make sure that we're clear on it. So I think that's important. But certainly we would explore quite a lot of them to look at what value is there.
Yeah, and then you also talked, I mean, obviously from a Skill in Ireland perspective, we're, very interested in the skills and upskilling, the people development part of this, which came through, I think, on both from Nessa's side in terms of the people strategy wave two, and then in a lot of your conversation as well, Melissa. And you talked about, uh, staff constraints in the market and even in the organization, and how you're looking to move your own team up the value chain in terms of their skill, their contribution to the business. How do you manage that, or how might you advise other SMEs on this webinar to manage that transition? We're talking about AI literacy, to manage that transition of getting your team then to those specialist roles, considering those constraints of budget and time and availability to train. How have you done that?
Yeah, so Michelle, I think that the first thing is like the easiest way I think is you look at like the people who are most interested in this space, and you have some team members who have a more of a natural inclination to kind of explore these tools as well. So I think that's important. And it's about providing them with the tools, providing with them with the training, and then working with them on use cases that deliver value. And I think it's back to, even if you have someone who's quite resistant to these tools as well, look, if you're going to show them a way that they can save 10, 15% of time on a particular activity, of course they're going to engage with it. So I think you just have to always bring it back to the practicalities of what this is going to save as well. And then certainly for us as an organization, like, we have a core value about seeking out new ways of doing things. And just because we're doing something this way today doesn't mean that's how we're going to do it tomorrow. So that's part of our DNA. It's part of who we are. So there's a natural expectation that we will always be looking at new and improved ways to do things. And that's very much part of the value offering that we bring to clients. So our clients are looking to us for ways that we can add more value. And for them, if we're increasing the efficiency and the level of the team, that's a good thing overall. So
I love linking it to the values. That's that's
yeah.
amazing. Nessa, just even, I mean, talking about the constant change, and I'll wrap up soon now, just as the regulation like the EUA Act evolves, how can SMEs keep that skills and understanding around the data ethics and governance like up to date over time, rather than treating it as a one-off exercise?
Yeah, so I said, going back to my point, like, I suppose having been involved in a lot of training rollouts, there is that tendency to go, yeah, tick, we've prepared everybody for that. But I suppose, let's say, that kind of learning in the flow of work, and having those constant conversations. I think board members and other governance entities need to realize what their responsibilities are, and I think that needs to be part of that constant conversation, rather than the rollout of the 2-minute video or checklist. So as you say, Michelle, it needs to be a kind of a constant agenda item, constant development item, and going back to that idea of that kind of supervision and development, rather than those one-offs, or that very kind of punitive aspect, because where people are unsupported, unsupervised, that's where the risks occur.
Great. Thank you, Nessa. I think 2 minutes to go. I might hand back to Alexa to close the session.
Yeah. And look, I suppose just I'll be brief, because I know we've taken everybody's lunch already. So just to really thank Nessa and Melissa for joining myself and Michelle here today. Look, this is something that SkillNet and Enterprise Ireland have been working on for quite a while in the background, and I guess we see the importance of reaching out to the enterprise base right across Ireland to understand their skills needs, and then from an EI point of view to understand where we can come in with our support. So kind of, there's no such thing as a free stolen lunch. We've a QR code up on screen there. We'd love to get your feedback from today. The way we can best design, the continued supports that we offer in Enterprise Ireland and that SkillNet offer and develop out through their networks as well, is to hear from you. So please, if you can take the time, I promise it's a very brief survey. But it'll just allow us to make sure that we're delivering the content and the funding supports and the training supports that you all need. So if you can take a couple of minutes to just fill that in, I'd really appreciate it. So look, I think we've heard a lot today. I think one of the big things that has come out to me is the role of the human in this kind of AI development can't be underestimated. So I think that the training capability that we're all kind of embarking on across all of our organizations is something that's going to be an ongoing process, and it's not one and done, as we've heard today. So our next webinar is going to be on the 19th of May, and kind of building from the high bar that Melissa has set, we're going to be looking at more company stories and insights from businesses who have rolled out AI within their companies and who have really embedded it as part of how they generate value in their businesses. So we hope lots of you will be able to join us on the 19th of May. And I'd just like to thank you all for joining the webinar today. And we'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.